Well, good afternoon. Thank you all very much for coming, and welcome to Colliers' 15th Annual Outlook Conference. This year's theme is Embracing Idaho's Future. I'm George Iliff, Managing Owner of Colliers International, Idaho. We very much appreciate you being here and appreciate your business, our personal and professional relationships with you. Thank you very much. I didn't see any elected officials come in the room today, so if there are any, please stand. If not, we'll be thinking about you. Okay. So I'd like to thank our sponsors. First, our presenting sponsors who've been with us for quite some time. A10 Capital. A10 Capital is a nationwide lender headquartered in Boise, offering non-recourse market competitive rates for short and long-term financing. Givens Pursley, authenticity, ingenuity, and community, and Washington Trust, be financially awesome. And we were talking about maybe having a rate war between 810 and Washington Trust. What do you think, Terrell? He said he couldn't see me. I can't see you either. So our co-sponsors who are new this year are ACO Engineered Systems, Centimark, Cutting Edge Landscape, Group 1 Sotheby's, and Infinity Signs. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our MC for the afternoon, Jim Shipman. Jim is our market leader. He's our president. He's been with us a year this month, and his background is in real estate law and development, and he's a deal maker. He's gained respect throughout our office and this community in the short period of time he's been here, and we really appreciate his leadership. And Jim is the leadership of Colliers in the future. Jim?
Thank you, George. And welcome, everybody. I want to reiterate what George said in thanking our sponsors who help us put this great event on. Without them, we couldn't do this. And primarily, I want to thank all of you. It's great to look out and see this collection of leadership from both business and community in the Treasure Valley and throughout Idaho. So thank you all for coming. We hope to provide you some information today that's worthwhile, that you can take with you. Hopefully it will lead to some further questions that you can follow up in the reception afterwards. Now that I've mentioned that, you realize that there's a reception, so you'll all be watching the clock diligently so we can get to the drinks afterwards. You're going to get a lot of information today and a lot of data on what's happening locally and around the state. I just want to take a moment, and I'd like to share with you what we've been doing at Colliers over the last year since you were with us for the 2017 Outlook Conference. We've had a lot of activity. We are very, very optimistic about our future and the future of the Treasure Valley, and excited about what's happening. Now, everybody knows Idaho is no longer a secret. Idaho is a target. It's no longer under the radar. We can see behind me here, we've got all these different publications calling out Idaho, whether it's the number 6 happiest state in America, the number 1 fastest growing state for wage growth, and most recently Forbes listed Boise as the number 1 fastest growing city in America. So we all know that means there's a lot of growth. There's a lot happening, and as a result of all this notoriety and attention that we're getting and the folks flocking from the coasts, from the Midwest and other areas, obviously that's leading to a lot of population growth. Growth in some folks' mind can be a dirty word. We're very optimistic about it. We're very excited about it. If you look at what's going to happen in Idaho over the next 20 years, the projections show that Idaho will exceed 2 million residents. The Treasure Valley alone should exceed 1 million. We're just under 700,000 now in the Treasure Valley. And that growth is also booming in the Magic Valley and eastern Idaho. There's a lot of activity, a lot of things happening. We are embracing that. At Colliers, we think it's really important as a business leader, a community leader, and particularly being in the commercial real estate business, we think it's very important to embrace that growth and embrace the future. What have we been doing at Colliers? Well, first of all, Colliers International most recently opened up a new office in Salt Lake City, Utah. Colliers International is one of the largest commercial real estate companies in the world. We're very excited about the opening of the Salt Lake City office. This is an opportunity for us here in Idaho. There's a lot of business transacted between Idaho and Salt Lake. Salt Lake has been booming. It's a sister city just 5 hours away. So in a lot of ways, Colliers kind of filled the hole in the donut. It was one of the largest cities without a Colliers presence. That's really exciting for us. On a local level, a little history of Colliers. 2001, George Iliff acquired this office from Colliers International. We're totally locally owned, locally managed, and embrace our Idaho roots and the folks that work with us and all the local connections that we've got. In 2007, we opened an office in Nampa, led by Mike Pena, Bryant Jones, and Lincoln Haygood. We've got a team there that is absolutely capitalizing on all the growth in Canyon County and leading the way. We're the only brokerage company in the Treasure Valley that has a dedicated office in Nampa and in Canyon County. We're very proud of that, and we expect to see a lot of continued growth there. This year, in April of 2018, we opened our Pocatello office, led by Don and Jared Zeeby. Don and Jared are two of the commercial real estate leaders in Eastern Idaho. They've been at it a long time. Their names are synonymous with commercial real estate. We're really excited to have them on board, expanding our efforts there. With all the growth that is moving north along the I-15 corridor from Salt Lake City into Pocatello and Idaho Falls. And just a week ago, we added Matt Presley, a new broker, brand new broker, who will be working with Don and Jared. He's in Idaho Falls and will be helping expand our presence there. And then finally, just on September 1, we added a Twin Falls office led by Steve DeLuca. Just like Don and Jared in Eastern Idaho, Steve is the name when you're in the Magic Valley and in Twin Falls when it comes to commercial real estate. Steve is really excited to come on board with us. We're opening a new office there. We expect to have not only a lot of brokerage services, but also property management services as a result, expanding in those areas. So from Boise through Twin, Pocatello, and Idaho Falls, we've got the map covered. What is that growth? How does that translate to us? Since we were here talking to you last year, we've had a 25% increase in the number of salespeople within Colliers, Idaho. And as many of you know, our other primary line of business, other than just brokerage, is property management, third-party property management. We've got a terrific team here of accountants, real estate managers, maintenance technicians that handle third-party property management services for property owners across the state. In fact, we've expanded this year. Just in the last couple of months, we've taken on a property in Ontario, Oregon, and a property in Great Falls, Montana. So we're really becoming a regional force as the preeminent property manager in the state of Idaho and beyond. And in 2018, the result of that focus and the efforts of our great team has been that we have increased our square footage under management by 35% just in the first 10 months of 2018. So we're obviously embracing these opportunities, embracing the future, and we're doing it in a way that it's very important to us, and you'll hear from some of our speakers today, also something that Idaho needs to focus on. We need to maintain our roots. We need to maintain our core values. We need to grow. We need to manage the growth, embrace it, but manage it in a responsible way. And I think at Colliers, one of the things that we've been known for and what George has established over the last 18 years so beautifully is we have a real collegial and collaborative community, our office, our culture, where we put the customer first and our folks work hard and play hard and get along, and really it's a great place to work. And in fact, with all this growth and all these changes, this year we were named the third best place to work in the state of Idaho for medium-sized companies. So that's something that we are extremely proud of and something we're going to keep our eye on and maintaining that culture. And we hope that all of you as community leaders and business leaders, as we march on into the future, we're embracing this growth and these opportunities, and we'll do that as well with our communities and with the state. That's a little bit about where Colliers is. Now I want to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dr. Joseph Coughlin. Dr. Coughlin is coming to us live from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He will be with us live via an audio and video feed here in a moment. Dr. Coughlin is the director of the Age Lab at MIT. He has been featured on a variety of media outlets: CNN, NBC, CBS, BBC, ABC. He's a contributor to The Economist, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and a regular columnist with Forbes. Dr. Coughlin has most recently written a book called The Longevity Economy, and I picked it up a couple weeks ago and have been reading it. I have not finished it quite yet, but it is a great read, a lot of valuable information. I would encourage folks to pick up a copy if you get an opportunity. I'm excited to hear what Dr. Coughlin has to say today. He's one of the leading minds on innovations, consumer behaviors, global demographics, as these economies change and move forward. So with that, I hope our technology is sound here. I will turn it over just with a snap to Dr. Joseph Coughlin.
Well, Jim, can you hear me? Is this internet thing just a passing phase, or is it working?
It's here, Joe. It's for real. Welcome.
Yeah, I thought it was just a passing phase. Jim, thank you very much. I want to thank you for your help and your colleague Melanie's help for bringing me to all of you virtually. I am truly sorry that I cannot be there because Idaho is one of the most beautiful states. I've done my share of hiking up in the Bitterroot and the lake, and I hope to come back to do that again. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to talk to you about some things that I really enjoy. Demography, and as we like to say in my world, demography is destiny. And so I'm going to try to tell you a little story about what's going on, shall we say, in Idaho, but around you. And in fact, you should really take a bow, given the statistics that Jim was talking to you about, and the fact that you all live there. You know that you live in not just a beautiful place, but a place that everyone else would like to be. So I'm going to show you some trends and technologies and how we think about work and play and life that are driving not just real estate, but showing the authenticity of what you have there in Boise and the like is something that other places wish to emulate. You're looking at my team right there. We are basically a team of about 1/3 of social science, behavioral science, 1/3 engineering and data science, and another third that are a variety of other things from psychology to social work and the like. Our mission is to do research on inventing life tomorrow and 100 years of quality living. So we look from everybody from Gen Z, the teenagers that we are wandering around, all the way up to age 100. So I'm getting to take credit for a lot of smart people. And in case you're interested, I am the follically challenged bow tie wearing person on the ground, to give you a sense as to who's talking at the microphone now. My book, The Longevity Economy. Jim, thank you so much for giving it a plug. If any of you enjoy it, please tell your friends. If you do not enjoy it, keep it to yourself. So let's get started a little bit. I want you to imagine, in the next few minutes, I want to have you think about a world that is gray, it is delayed, it is small, and it is distinctly female. This is the demographic reality of what we're looking at, not just the United States, but worldwide. Imagine this. People are not just living longer, but half the children born in the so-called rich world, the US, Europe, Japan, and the like, half the children born in 2007 are guesstimated to live past 100 years. Think about what that means. Not how many jobs will you have, how many careers will you have? How many times will you move? How many times will you have to go back to school just to stay on point with the technology and changing knowledge? Will my wife of 30 plus years want to hear the same jokes from me over and over again for another 30 years? So while one of the first things I want you to note is that we're not just living longer, but frankly, we're hoping to live better as well. That 100 years is becoming very much the new normal of what we could expect. The fastest growing part of the population, not just in the US, but worldwide, is 85 plus. That's a change that we've never thought about. This is a new opportunity for how we design our communities, how we think about where we live, the future of work and the like. Because old age, while we've always had older people, we've never had this many with, shall we say, the new generation gap of expectations. So you can look for yourself on the map. The darker the state, and Idaho is near the darkest, but not quite the darkest, the higher the concentration of older adults. Like Utah, you are a relatively young state, Utah being the youngest out there because your birth rate is higher than the national average. But imagine this, one American that is the baby boomers, those folks born between 1946 and 64, are turning 72 every 7 to 8 seconds. But this is not just about numbers. This is pure economics. I want you to think about the longevity economy. Globally, the 60 plus control 30% of the global spend. By the way, in the United States, to bring it closer to home, the 50 plus control 70. That is 70% of the global spend. This is not your parents, shall we say, or grandparents' economics. This is a new generation of more people with more education, more money, and greater expectations to have places and spaces to live well. And believe it or not, the fastest growing group of people going back to school are people over age 50. In fact, in the United States already, there are 700,000 people over 60 that are matriculating in degree programs. This is a very different population. And in fact, more than 25% of the population over age 50 have a college education. And what are we going to be doing in that old age? Think about what this means for real estate and commercial space. We're going to be working. We're going to be working longer. In fact, according to AARP, 40% of us over age 50 say we plan to work until we drop. Another 30%, on the other hand, say they plan to work until 70. And where are we living? The fact of the matter is 90% of us are not moving to beaches or golf courses, the like, but 90% of us are planning to muddle through by, shall we say, aging in place. 70% of Americans live in suburban and rural areas in the homes that they have a marriage, a mortgage, and memories, and they really hope to stay there one way or another. So the future may be gray, but it is also delayed. I want you to imagine this. 27 is the new 17. Now that may sound a little scary to you, but let me just give you a little factoids. The average age now of getting a driver's license for the average American male is 19.6. I don't know about any of you in the audience, but when I was 16 and a half and eligible for my license, I was at the DMV to ensure that I've got it. So one of the things we're starting to see is that generally speaking, there's about a 7 to 10 year lag with the millennials in doing the things that other generations did much earlier. In fact, imagine this. There's an entirely new language out there. In the 1950s, if you were 18, you were an adult. Bottom line was at 18, graduate school, join the army, go to college, get married, get a job. But the bottom line was get out. By the 1960s, we changed our language. We're now the 20s, if you will, are kind of adult time. It's time to explore, do a few things you want. But now look at this. 90s and the 2000s, we are now looking at, you ready for this? The 30s. In fact, 36 is now being marked, the new adulthood. My God, I was bald and had a marriage and a mortgage by the time I was 20s. And I was, frankly, you could argue, just a kid. In fact, what we're seeing is that we're not just taking longer to do driver's licenses. It's not just a matter of partnering. We're partnering later. We're not getting married later. Look at the general trend line of people between 18 and 30 who have either found a partner or have gotten married. We're seeing a total decrease over time. This is what drives, in many cases, household composition, jobs, and the idea of what we would be looking for future real estate and community development. In fact, in terms of household formation, look at this. The group that is generating more new households are not who you might expect, the 25 to 34, although there's a humble growth there. But look at it. It's the 55 to 65 plus that are driving new downsizing condos, new apartment living, selling houses to move, or due to death, disability, and divorce, forming new households. So where are these people living? Well, some of you may know. 32% of Americans between 18 to 34 are living in your basement. But don't worry, in Europe, half of that number are doing that. So while it's only half teasing, one of the things I want to show you is that this is a real serious driver on how people think about real estate and what they're doing in the future and how that is going to affect, frankly, consumerism. The other thing we're seeing a delay on is children. Now, Idaho has a higher fertility rate, and Boise in particular has a higher fertility rate than the national average. You need 2.1 children to have just keeping the population even. Boise is about 2.6. But today, 1 in 5 American women are child-free compared to 1 in 10 in the 1970s. In fact, what we are witnessing is what we call a birth dearth or demographic winter. Worldwide, we are seeing a drop in the birth rate. Imagine this. The baby boomers' parents, the World War II generation, had roughly 3.2 children per female. The baby boomers, about 2.1, 2.2. Gen X, those of you in the room born between 1964 and 79, about 1.7. Are you getting the trend line here? And the millennials, while still very much a work in progress in their 20s and 30s, we're looking closer to 1.4. In fact, globally, I want you to imagine this number. By 2047, more people on the planet will be over age 60 than there will be children under the age of 15. The future is gray, it is delayed, but it is also small because frankly, if we're not having children, many of us are not getting married or otherwise. We're living by ourselves. Look at this. 27% of households in the United States are living solo. That is households of one. In Europe, it's much more pronounced. Do you know that in Brussels, Oslo, Paris, Munich, more than 50% of the households there are households of one? But if you look in the United States, you'll find that, frankly, there are many metropolitan areas where we're looking at well more than 1/4 or 1 in 3 of the homes are households of one. Again, you should take great pride, I would argue, in Boise, in the state of Idaho in general, that generally speaking, your households are primarily made up of 2.1 people. I'm not sure what that 0.1 looks like, but we're just going to assume it's a very small child. But the fact of the matter is that we're seeing a community, we're seeing a household composition being more than the national average, which is making you an attractive place to live, work, and play. And we're seeing, frankly, family size, even those who do have two, smaller. By the way, I love this photo because I think the dog is bigger than the house. And the fact is that what we're seeing is that rather than having children around the world, but particularly in the United States and Europe and parts of Asia, people would rather have pets than they would rather have children. In fact, some developers are now building properties with the following idea: one person plus dog. Micro units that are 2 burner stoves, enough for your dog and enough for you, half refrigerators and the like. And this is by choice. This is not due to economics or anything else. It's just a new lifestyle that is quickly emerging. Imagine this. Last time you were at the grocery store, did you notice that the grocery carts have gotten smaller? The fastest selling shopping cart are those shopping carts that are small. Why? Think about it. Why do you want to go into 5 acres of parking lot into 3 acres of store to buy, shall we say, 1 can of tuna fish? Well, I'm speaking to a bunch of folks from Idaho. I had to put a potato in there. Let me tell you, my family's from very far upstate New York, the part that says welcome to Canada. We used to buy 100-pound bags of potatoes every year at this time and putting them in the cellar. We're now seeing household sizes be so small that grocery stores are now selling potatoes 1 barcode at a time. And you may say, well, Joe, that's not that novel. Well, how about this? Duncan Hines and others are now selling birthday cakes for a party of 1. This is a profound change in how we're looking at society and how we live. In fact, Walmart, Metro stores, Carrefour, Kaisers, the big box stores around the world are now developing new urban format stores that are smaller, not just to fit into the city, but frankly, to be able to fit the new household. Walmart got to be the largest company in the world, not just because of an amazing supply chain strategy, but because big families powered the big box. We're now seeing smaller families, so now the box is getting smaller. And this is Agnes, the Age Gain Now Empathy System. Next time you're in a CVS, or if you read my book, you can read about it. This is a suit that my students and companies that we work with wear to get the feeling, or shall we say, the joy and the pain of being 75 to 80 years old. So we helped redesign store shelves to make them lower, lighting to make it clearer, aisles that are easier to navigate, so that we don't have an aisle that is hard to navigate, but frankly, stores that are inviting across the ages. And by the way, across the ages, one of the things that we are seeing are people that are not just moving to cities. They're not. They're moving to urban areas. The population of Boise falls into the just right category. big enough to be a city to have the intensity, the density, and the accessibility and fun of an urban area, but not the hassle of a New York, a Boston, an LA, and the like. In fact, the fastest growing communities out there are college communities. As I like to say, no one moves to Ann Arbor for the weather, but they move there for the connection, the community, and the fun that can be found in a city. And this is something for the millennials as much as it is for the 50 plus. So if you look at where people are moving, they're coming for you. You've got a great place out there. People are moving to western states and southern states. And look at the sweet spot of population. We're looking at cities over 150,000. This is really where people are looking. And so, yes, as Jim said earlier, people have discovered Idaho and cities and states like it. This is going to be the new authentic community that we all want a part of. Finally, the future is female. And what do I mean by that? Women now have more degrees in all fields but engineering since 1988, and they're about to eclipse in that. And in case you didn't know it, your wife, your sister, your mother, your spouse, whatever it might be, your partner is the #1 chief consumer officer in the home. She is the key buyer of consumer electronics. 65% of automobiles, unless of course it's a luxury car, then she influences 86% of those purchases. 80% of home improvement. Just ask what Lowe's and Home Depot likes to cater to. Not just to the guy with a 3/4 ton pickup truck sitting out front. He's actually picking up what the woman between 45 and 55 picked out. And by the way, Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, 90 cents on the dollar of decisions are made by women when it comes to healthcare. And for those of you in real estate, younger women are buying homes at twice the rate of younger men. And entrepreneurship is the new women's movement. Women over 50 are the second largest group of people starting new businesses, looking for commercial space, looking for shared services, and the like to develop new businesses that they can maintain their independence and freedom around. So let me kind of wrap this up a little bit with a few hallucinations or visions, depending on your level of kindness. No one uses crystal balls anymore, so we will just kind of take a few guesses at a few areas you may find interesting. The first is work being rethought. With all these new people in the workplace, but also people living longer, you've got 5 generations of workers under one roof. Think about the nature of work. Think about how places need to be redesigned to accommodate different workers with different physical needs as well as cognitive needs and the like. In fact, not only are people working longer, some professions are working much longer than others because no one wants the job. Believe it or not, I know this is hard to believe, especially here in Cambridge, there's a national clown shortage. The average clown now is 57 years old. By the way, if you talk to the clown industry, they say it's due to a rising set of standards to be a clown. We'll just let that sit for a minute. But financial advisors, average age 56. Doctors, just when we need them, 53. Nurses, 50. I can go on. Truck drivers, 51. Anyone in the energy business knows that the average engineer out there in the energy and petrol business has aged dramatically. And the average farmer, 61 years old. Millennials are looking for jobs that offer flexibility. In fact, many of them are saying we want flexibility well over finance. We will take less money in order to have more flexibility in general. Welcome to the gig economy, shared workplaces. This is not just for the millennials. We're finding that older people that are doing transitions from retirement, maybe providing care, or frankly, simply want freedom to do what they want, are looking at real estate and commercial spaces that allow them the flexibility to start new businesses, work part-time, or the other things. And think about this. This is the cubicle that many of us started our careers in. The 5-generation workplace is now demanding that workers and employers reinvent what that space looks like. Places to educate, collaborate, and concentrate. Or in this case, this is Quicken's headquarters that redesigned its workforce workspace based upon from the cubicle as I showed you to this. I don't know about any of you, but to me, it's closer to being a migraine maker. But the fact of the matter is that we're having to redesign spaces to accommodate the needs and the demands of a 5-generation workplace. And do you remember there used to be the idea of work-life, and then there was work-life balance, daycares and elder cares and the like. We're now seeing where real estate is reinforcing a whole new vision of work. work-life integration. So it's not work and life are separated. It's not about balance. It's about working here, living here, playing here. In fact, if you look at real estate offers that are not just in the United States, but even London, we are now creating environments where, frankly, the way I look at it, you will never leave. You will work here, you will play here, and you will live here. So it's just a whole new way of how we are structuring our social, family, and work lives. How about this? From ownership to knowership. Those of you that are in rental property, in rental space may recognize this. We are now living in a world where, frankly, we would rather have it all, but own none of it. Hey, Dad, you can either have a house or have a life. I'm having a life. So what we are now seeing is people saying, look, we have the highest rentership rate in the United States that we've had since the 1930s. We are buying experience rather than buying place or a whole new idea of what wealth may be. We are not owning our cars. We are using Uber. We're using Lyft. We're using Zipcar. Our music and our books are in the clouds. And frankly, even our clothing, we are getting on subscription by the month or by the weekend. The fact is that the nature of wealth and property and experience are fundamentally changing. That means that really real estate and property now must be more about the amenity economy rather than simply the space itself. Finally, health everywhere. Younger people are more concerned, proactive, and wish to measure their well-being. Older people are trying to measure their well-being with chronic conditions. Think about this. 100 million Americans have one chronic condition, 60 million have two, and 30 million have three or more chronic conditions. We're now looking at technologies and spaces and places that will have hyper-specialized health services, not just going to the drugstore for a check, for your flu shot or the like, but very new retail commercial spaces that will be about the hyper-specialization of disease and diagnostics and the like, all being driven by the longevity economy. On that note, Jim, I want to thank you. I want to thank your audience. Hopefully I brought that in on time. And I really appreciate, for even virtually, being able to visit you in Boise. And I hope to meet all of you someday in person. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Coughlin. What a great presentation, a lot of amazing information, and also I'm just so relieved that we pulled that off from a technology standpoint. Really had no idea when we came into today whether that was going to work. I'd like to introduce this next speaker. Interestingly, we're talking about growth. I met Gordon back in the mid-'80s when his older brother and I were roommates in college. Gordon was a younger brother that came to visit, hung out, ate all our food, watched SportsCenter till all hours of the night in our house off campus. Got to know him real well. His older brother is one of my closest friends. Since then, Gordon went on to Brown University, got an Ivy League degree while playing varsity hockey. Then decided to take it easy and went on to Stanford University, graduated from the School of Business. Then he was the director of the Innovations Lab at Harvard University. 3 years ago now, I guess, 2015, Gordon came on as the founder and the dean of the School of Innovation and Design at Boise State. We are so fortunate in this community to have someone like Gordon Jones here bringing his knowledge, and I want to welcome him and excited to hear what he has to say for us today.
Thanks, Jim. That is all true. Jim and I met a long time ago. I thought you might not have shared as much, Jim. Mutually assured destruction, given what we know of each other, is a powerful thing. So thanks for at least keeping it light. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be able to follow on the heels of Joe Coughlin at MIT. Obviously, one of the two of us was bright enough to make the move, actually, to Boise. So I'm thrilled to be here. Not that I'm comparing IQs, because I'm sure Joe's would certainly exceed mine. There's really, if I think of one theme from my quick time here in my remarks, I think I'm going to focus, if you had to distill it all down into what is directed and strategic design within a capitalistic framework for Boise. When I think of a development community, this is a group of decision makers. You are all a group that has tremendous influence and guidance, and frankly will direct much of what this metropolitan area and this state will be. And we've just seen this is about a growth story. And so the opportunity to share with you some observations I have for your consideration, nothing more, is something I appreciate. Before I do that, let me tell you a brief slide or two on how did I end up here and what am I actually doing at Boise State, just to set some additional context. So I came here in 2015 from Boise with my wife and my 4 kids pictured here. Could be a picture, I'm going to guess, for any of us, many of us in this room. At the same time, there were 3 things that drew me to Boise, and I'll be quick about them. One was vocational opportunity. The opportunity, being at the Harvard Innovation Lab, I got a lot of eyebrows raised from folks when I said, hey, I'm leaving something that currently is a pride and joy for this university. A quarter of all students from 18 to 40-year-old postdocs go through this facility. Started in 2011 as I was the inaugural director, but I'm going west. I'm going to Boise State. A lot of folks said, why? What's going on? And I said there was certainly, from my standpoint, the chance to innovate, to join this community and tackle what I think are a multitude of challenges in higher ed that I'll reference on the next slide, so I won't get into detail right now. The second thing, and it's a theme we're all familiar with here, is lifestyle. The chance to shift from a hyper investment in my kids. I like to say I took my kids from taking music lessons, not only music lessons from someone renowned, but in Mandarin, because we do it in Boston and Seattle and San Fran. How can I make sure my child at age 5, where there's waiting lists for preschools that go pre-birth, because you don't want your kid to fall behind. How do I swap that for the experiential learning that comes from a place that has tremendous natural amenities, where my kids ride their bikes, they go into the foothills here in Boise, they come back with animal bones, with rocks, we look up what kind of animal they came from. I promise you in Boston, if my kid walked in the door with a bone, we'd be calling the cops, okay? Not here. But fundamentally, the idea that I don't have to sacrifice the idea that my kids can be globally competitive and yet enjoy much of what is so rich about this community, from an experiential learning, a chance to grow up, shift my focus from my kids on 15-minute increments to 2+ hour increments and not be concerned, is something that I'm going to guess many of us, if not every one of us, appreciate and understand. Third thing is vibrancy. This isn't a place of people who are trading on resources from some other place and kind of resign themselves to enjoying the benefits of Boise. This is a place that's more blue collar than that. It's a working community. And it's very attractive, I would argue, to a large swath of people who also want to join in and be active in that. It's a place that's on the move. It's a place that doesn't mind elevating its status. I don't believe we sit in what I call a fixed mindset, the way it will always be. I think we're a place where we think we can change it, we can innovate it, we can create it here in Idaho. And those 3 things in particular are what drew me. My guess is I'm not alone. And so I think that in some ways you can decide to what extent I'm an example of many others, but that's certainly what drove me here, those 3 things. What am I doing at Boise State? It's certainly, as I said, it's an opportunity. During my time at Harvard, I had the chance to meet, there are 4,000 higher ed institutions in this country, 4,000 that sit out there. At Harvard, I had a chance to host no fewer in person than 200 of those universities and colleges who all wanted to come see something that had captivated them, this Harvard Innovation Lab. And at the same time, what I pattern recognized after meeting all these schools was they actually don't necessarily understand why they're even there. They're there because they sort of, it's maybe a pilgrimage to Rome for those of the Catholic faith, or Mecca for others. Fundamentally, they were coming to look and see what Harvard was doing without regard for what their own university was the best fit for them. And my concern with that is that fundamentally what I recognized is that higher ed has a lot of problems, which I'll get into in a second, but what the need was is most universities are playing a game they're never going to win at. They're on a 100 to 1,000 year strategy, whether they admit it or not, through their behavior, to try to become Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Duke, out of reference to you, Jim, deference, others. But fundamentally, they're trying to play a game they're not structurally designed to win. And that bothered me because, frankly, out of the top 200 schools, 3,800 other schools are charging Harvard-like prices, or in locally adjusted dollars, they get close to that. And yet they're not delivering what those schools currently deliver. And I'll hold on that point from there. There's 3 facts that keep me up at night. Let me crystallize it in these 3. Today, in America, 1 out of 2 students who start college are not finishing after 6 years. The second highest debt burden in this country is student loan debt, behind mortgage debt, ahead of credit card debt, and ahead of auto loan debt. Third, statistically, Rockefeller Foundation, I'm quoting here, 1 out of 2 students within the last 5 years who've graduated report being in jobs that didn't require them to have a college degree, or they reported feeling underemployed. I don't know another industry that gets away with those statistics. 1 out of 2 people who fly our airline make it. 1 out of 2 people who drive our car will not get there or won't enjoy the full ownership. And yet I don't see a level of heterodoxy out there looking for solutions, desperate to think about what could be applied in our market for our students. Instead, it's this mimicry behavior, structurally imperfect and not designed to win. And at the end of the day, if I believe we're looking with honesty, we risk creating more victims than we do beneficiaries of higher ed. That is why we on campus are often perplexed at what we see as a growing narrative which suggests, geez, why am I going to college? When in reality, we're financially pushing the risk onto students as we drive cost of attendance through the roof, outstripping household income increases 2 to 3 to 1 over the last 20 years. And yet we're in a time when jobs are not necessarily plentiful. So the college I run is a diploma granting mechanism. President Custra, I believe, had enough vision and saw the idea that if we create the full kahuna in collegiate structural land, a diploma granting college that has the autonomy and a level of authority to conceive of solutions that might create answers to some of these issues. And so whether that be subscriptions to Boise State that my college is driving, sort of a Netflix for college that drives down the cost of education, to partnering with Harvard for certificates for students, for IDEA, with Apple, that we're focused on opening up opportunities in this. So I share this with you as a little bit of a window into my background, but also as a jumping off point, because I don't believe the work of the College of Innovation and Design happens with a fixed mindset. The idea that business as usual will carry the day, and that I'm just inheriting another college to be built and sort of create the usual things you might expect a college to do. So I share these observations with you in the next few slides on the idea of what is these opportunities from an innovator's mindset as we think about the Treasure Valley, the change we're facing, and where you as decision makers in your industries and your roles can be focused. So a few of these. One is, I don't know who gave this quote, but I have it on my wall. And if anybody knows, come up to me after. But truth, I believe, comes in 2 forms: genuine insights and collisions with reality. Now, if I think about that for a minute, clearly the truth in this, when I apply it to Boise, and it's a room full of folks who understand it, we hear it again and again, is our state is changing. I would argue it's positive, but it is population growth, factually. 2.2% in the last year. You saw the statistics, 1 million plus in Metro Boise by 2040. We should be preparing for growth. We know it is coming. So it is coming. The question is, how do we deal with the change? I would argue insight-driven mindsets are about leaning into new solutions, not keeping a fixed idea on what the tactics are that are required. Collisions with the reality is the idea that we react to situations we don't necessarily see what's coming. The embodiment I can think of, and I don't have her picture right now, of the collision mindset is my 90-year-old mother. Now, my mother, perhaps not your mother, but for 4 years she kept complaining to me on the phone back east about the noise in the wall behind her bed. 4 years. She finally decided to call someone and found there was not 1, but 8 raccoons living behind her headboard. And how she lived with that, I don't know, because she said from 3 to 5 a.m. she could hear such a ruckus. She spoke at 98 to her cousin and just was so upset. She called me and said, I'm so upset because Sally just doesn't remember all the shared stories, and something must be wrong. And I said, well, Mom, for the last 10 years she's been dealing with dementia. My mom didn't quite put 2 plus 2 together, right? That maybe that might be a result of that. That was supposed to make you laugh, but that's okay. That's fine. Mom wouldn't mind. Now, applied to the Treasure Valley, what is the thinking that models each form? I don't think that it requires a sacrifice, the leaning in or the defensive. I don't think this is a tension between the values that are intrinsically Idaho. To me, whether it be self-determination, rugged individualism, independence, the spirit of the West, this work ethic or blue-collarness that comes with our state, shoulder to the grindstone, it's just how you frame it. When I told my wife we were moving here to Boise, she said, that's going to be really, really hard. We went through it in detail, and I said, I'm not sure it's going to be hard. At the end of the day, we agreed we were both right. It depends on the framework we bring to this. Are we a leaning in audience here on the change we're experiencing? I think so, but I share that with the idea that it may require solutions that are different than what we've been working with. To me, I'm just going to leave it at that because I know I'm going to run short on time. The next slide is something else that certainly you've heard in spades today, is that the Treasure Valley and Idaho overall is clearly special. To me, I think about the term livability at scale, and you've heard Joe talk about this as well. It's urban amenities without the friction costs. That was the sweet spot I think we just heard there, and I had no idea what he was going to be talking about. It's a community where, to me, people mix with relative ease. The term Boise nice, which I'm assuming goes on to Treasure Valley nice and Idaho nice. I think of it every day as sort of the idea that people do have some sense of maybe I should pick up after myself or mention to the person that riding with a helmet on your bicycle would be safer. That's a community that cares. That's not hassling people. We have the capacity to be nice, and that comes with very specific environment that we live in. So the key question is, how do we ensure that the growth we're experiencing isn't cancerous? We know in organizations, at least organizations I've been a part of, that too much growth, too fast, can create problems. That's not necessarily a great thing, too much, too fast. So to me, we face two choices. One is we can distill and embrace the elements that make Idaho and the Treasure Valley great, and then commit to the new solutions or the tactics required to meet that growth. Or, like my 90-year-old mother, perhaps roll the dice, ignore the growth, and continue with business as usual. Again, not something I'm recommending, but I call it out. Back to mom again. Many of you have moms. I'm sure that you also have, to illustrate my point, mom's favorite recipe, a cake, cookies, whatever it may be. It tastes great when you eat it in your home. But if I asked your mom or you to go make that recipe for this room right here and just scale up that recipe, I got a feeling it's just not going to taste the same. Industrial level thinking is clearly different than at the micro level. So we just can't scale up. So I don't know for this area. I'm not a development expert, but I certainly think about how do we do things differently in higher ed. So is it light rail, expanded airport, new planning authorities, ability to bind communities into agreements? Do we purchase right-of-ways if we don't have the money, the willpower, the mechanisms to get it done now? Are there new associations to be formed? You all as decision makers, new ways to assemble decision makers where private solutions to public structural deficits. Are we a community that wants to build Boise overall, the Treasure Valley overall, the state overall, and own on the result? I hope not. We're a group that's instead trading on the momentum. How can the developers, the financiers, not only get these projects done, but do it in collaborative ways? My role on CCDC, whether that be as a commissioner at Trailhead, which is a public-private startup on ecosystem builder, is about thinking about smart collaboration. I think we can preserve those unique attributes and design for tomorrow. My next slide says, what's a way to do this? One is, I think a strategy is to be distinct. Be different. What's the picture I have here, right? It's the blue turf. How many blue turfs are there out there? I think there are 6 steps to consider if you are someone sitting in this audience saying, hey, that sounds great, but how do I start to operationalize a mindset or compare this to your own? One I'd suggest we think about is, do we have curiosity about multiple industries? Do you think we can learn across industry? Where do we have that peripheral vision? 2, do we have an analytical ability to synthesize and categorize the problems and issues facing the industry we're in? 3, do we have creative abilities to imagine the possibilities if we solved it? Do we do exercises that can actually imagine for a minute, reducing the constraints we think we face every day? 4, do we have collaborative and creative enough to generate the ideas that might represent the tactics? Do we have a 2020 vision? 5, to winnow those lists down, be honest with ourselves. We all like to look in the mirror and think that we're the skinniest person at the county fair, but fundamentally, are we willing to look with 2020 vision in those mirrors at what we do right or what we do wrong? And 6th, are we bold enough to launch those experiments? Meaning, do we have an appetite for experimentation, or are we not modeling that? At Boise State, I'd like to give an example. I want to eat my own cooking. I still think we should be trademarking the term blue turf thinking. But fundamentally, I think that's what I stand for my college, for what we do. Do we go after the new ideas focused on solving the problems I see, particularly in higher ed? I go to conferences that have nothing to do with higher ed. I go to where the venture capitalists are and the disruptors are, because where I see them investing is fundamentally going to point to me where the Achilles heel is in higher ed. Because those are smart people. They're putting LP dollars to work. They're not making bets that are frivolous, clearly. So where do you go to get your intelligence that might inform how you can be distinct? 2, I think about the drivers that affect my industry. In that case, in higher ed, it's cost of attendance, and it's the impact technology is going to have. The list of ideas, number 3, are endless. Themes about cost reduction of higher ed, lack of interoperability in higher ed, meaning you can't even transfer. I have a student who comes in who's got to step back a year from Washington State's Honors College because we don't recognize necessarily the title of the courses. That's not designed around students, I would argue. We get an extra year of tuition, but I'm not sure that's student-friendly. Synthetic degrees, models for driving access. Across campus, industry partners, regulatory and oversight. What are the things that we can be doing? As I said, in my college, we want to be putting those experiments to work, and I'll leave it at that. I will leave us with this last point, which is I'm proud of the fact just last week, U.S. News & World Report named Boise State one of the top 50 in the country most innovative universities. Now, ironically, what's special about that list certainly is top 50, there's 4,000 out there. But we're one of only 2 that are not in the top 125. What does that tell me? That says we're at velocity, the velocity with which we're innovating at this university. And I hope that the collision here for me is we're trying to build an asset that you can be proud of, that you can design around, that's going to be appealing. It dovetails in very clearly when we see students 50 plus coming in. What are we going to be doing to maintain the magnetic draw? But fundamentally, that velocity is significant. Ironically, there's schools out there that I'll bet you are promoting their top 50 status. The funny thing is they also carry the national ranking. A bunch of them actually under-index. They're top 25 and innovative, but they're actually ranked nationally as the 15th university. I think that's kind of funny. I wouldn't be promoting that if I were them. So then I get to my last 2 slides. If we're not, one is be distinct. What are we doing differently? This next one is innovate or die. Do we have that mindset? There are so many industries, you know them. My guess is you've seen these stories, but whether we move from traditional wristwatches to the technology-enabled Apple Watches, cars to driverless cars, to Kodak or Polaroid to digital photography. Each of them have to do with a mindset that I would argue that people too narrowly define the work they do. They were behaving as process experts, not as solvers of the problems in which they were in. Okay, and you go down the list, look at the opportunity that moving from just a timepiece to digitally enhanced technology. Now you can do healthcare through your wrist. You can do a whole number of things that Apple's unlocked. Driverless cars didn't come out of Detroit. Go look in August Wall Street Journal. Great article on how Google engineers went to Detroit and talked about this opportunity. And GM and many of the big players said, we have absolutely no use for this. Reminds me of one of my favorite quotes in the 1870s, an internal memo from Western Union that said, we have evaluated this device, the telephone, in quotes, and we have determined it is of no inherent value to us. What's our version today of that? What are you looking at and saying, that doesn't necessarily make sense? And then again, photography to the digital opportunity. I don't want us to be entrenched, and I'm hoping that we all in this room have a mindset for how do you do that? How can it be done? My last slide is to encourage the idea that we can act with vision. What's the game you're playing? You've heard the story of, it's a fable, but the person walking down, I think I've heard it told, is the cobblestone pathway in France, and this gentleman comes up to three masons. He asks the first one, what are you doing? First one says, what does it look like? I'm building a building. Second one, same workers all on the same project, says, hey, what are you doing? He says, well, can't you see I'm building a church? And the third one looks up and says, I'm building a cathedral. It's that systems mindset, the vision to imagine what could be, and the opportunity to implement that. I would argue, I have faculty, believe it or not, doing work, human environment systems faculty. I just had lunch with them today, and I mentioned my chance to have some remarks here. One of them said, it's interesting, her research is on the changing composition of the Treasure Valley land. She said by 2040, by 2050, the business as usual approach of how we're developing the Treasure Valley, 43% of the land used for farming from where we are today, not total valley land, from where we are today, almost half the land used for farming will be taken up for development. Higher density models she's modeled suggest we can cut that by a third. We have a multi-university study coming out evaluating the modern West boom-bust cycle. The old version being that you just drill the mine until there's no more gold, copper, coal. You go down the list. When it's done, we move on. And I think that's what certainly I end with, is the idea that I hope, I had in 2011 a chance to meet with a venture capitalist in Palo Alto, big name, big firm. He said, I'm leaving this industry. I said, why? He said, I'm leaving because it's actually become cluttered with people who are here to attach themselves to the success of venture capital. The real industry was about building companies, building the success in partnership with them. And my hope is that this is a group, and I see a lot of familiar faces, so I do believe it's a group that's focused on building this valley to accommodate the smart design with returns that absolutely make it worth your while and our time, so that we can benefit into the future without losing that chance for my kids, or your kids' kids to ride their bikes out in the foothills, come down with bones, and discover what animal comes from, rather than in the future calling the cops. So with that, thank you. I hope that I'm able to build an asset that you're proud of, and I think this university also is committed to that. So thank you, Jim, and thank you, George.
Thank you, Gordon. We are now going to, for the last segment of our presentation, invite the panel of experts, Colliers experts, to come on up. Chris, if we can get the podium out of the way at this point, that would be great. And again, thank you, Gordon. I really take away a couple of things from that. You know, one is we're going to hear a little bit right now about workforce concerns and having enough of an educated workforce. I think with someone like Gordon at the helm of the College of Design, Innovation and Design, the opportunity to grow that talent pool is in great hands. So we appreciate your words, and I invite you to follow up with Gordon afterwards. Now I'd like to turn it over to Clay Anderson. Clay is the moderator of our panel today. We've got folks in all of our different disciplines, and representing also our new Eastern Idaho effort. Clay is one of the top producers in our office. He has been with Colliers for 12 years. For those of you who've been here in the past, I know he's probably doesn't need introduction from many of you, but you saw him moderate the panel last year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Clay. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. All right, well, I'm going to stay down here and moderate. I'll probably be moving back and forth a little bit. I just want to share a few thoughts before we introduce the panelists. Each panelist will give about a 1-minute update on their segment of the market, and then we'll get into the questions and answers. The disclaimer is that as brokers, we are very positive people. And by the way, does everyone want to stand up for just a quick minute? I feel like after an hour, everybody just stand up and just kind of, I think 2 hours is tough to sit. This will buy us another 5 minutes on the back end of our panel. So, all right, if you feel good and loose, have a seat. But it reminds me of, there was a young man that was extremely positive, and so his uncle liked to experiment. He thought, I'm going to see how well this kid adapts to challenges. So for the kid's birthday, he dropped a pile of manure in the front lawn. He said, I'm going to see how this kid reacts when he gets home and he gets off the bus. So the uncle's standing there, and the kid comes off the bus, and he's waiting for the kid to start crying. It's his birthday. Uncle says, happy birthday, nephew. Here you go. The nephew has the biggest grin on his face, and he jumps into that pile of manure, and he starts just clearing away. His uncle says, what is he doing? And he said, there's got to be a horse in there somewhere. So he's very positive. And I think that's our disclaimer that brokers in general, I mean, we eat what we kill. We have to stay positive. And so hopefully the comments we have are fairly positive in the market and where we are today. A lot about embracing Idaho, embracing growth. We've all experienced it. There's a lot of positive things that we capitalize on. I want to just highlight a couple of things kind of as it relates to our daily life. I think all of us would say that if we've been here for the last 10 years, which I have, our commute has been more painful. I live in South Meridian, 12 miles. When I moved here 12 years ago, it was 12 miles, 15 minutes. And now it's anywhere from 25 to 35 minutes. So we pulled a slide up that showed over the 10-year period, over the last 10 years, there's an increase on I-84 of 27,000 more cars per day. So that's something real that we all experience, whether on State Street, Chinden, or whether we come in from other ways. Again, Boise, because of its draw from the coast and other markets, people want to be in the Intermountain West. We hear a lot about house prices. Over the last 8 years, the price of a house in Boise on a per square foot basis is up over 80%. Pretty dramatic. It's the only two markets that are close in that 80% range is San Francisco and Seattle. Important to note, though, that amongst all that rising price, we still are the low-cost provider in the Intermountain West, and clearly compared to the West Coast. So it's still a big draw, even though we've had this dramatic increase in pricing. So again, we'll take this example of the pain that we feel of the growth. We see rising costs. I want to take an example of, we'll step back. You can see how there's a dramatic increase in apartment construction. You see that in the valley, throughout the valley, a lot of apartments that have gone up. The graph to the right, or to the left, shows the amount of increased units added to the market. The red line shows occupancy rates. So clearly, as construction's gone up, it has not impacted occupancy at all. It's continually stayed strong. It's between 96 to 98%. The graph to the right shows that rates have continually increased in that same window. As construction costs go up, new projects, rates move up, and again, just that same line on occupancy. It's held very strong. So we have a very healthy market on both sides. I want to just take an example. If you were to live in, it used to be called the Clock Tower, that was Reflections. In 2010, in that project, you would have been paying $700 a month for a one-bedroom. Over the last 8 years, new ownership, they renovated the project. You have the Whitewater Park behind it. They renamed it the Whitewater Park. Today, what do you think you'd be paying for that unit? Anybody want to guess? Somebody said $1,200. Over $1,200. So a dramatic increase. Now, the market hasn't increased dramatically in every project, but that's just an example of someone that saw value change the position of the property, and then also that rising value. So with that, I'm going to introduce the panel. They'll each give a 1-minute update, and then we'll jump into the panel discussion. Our first presenter will be Don Zeeby from our Pocatello office. We're excited to add Eastern Idaho to our mix. And then we'll have Mike Pena with our Canyon County office, Devin Ogden with our industrial team, John Starr, hero from the land group, there we go, Melissa Jackson with our retail group, Dr. Jamie Anderson with the office. I'm still debating whether he's really a doctor or not, and then Lou Manglos with our investment team. So Don?
Thank you. I'm here to tell you that Eastern Idaho is alive and well. And Idaho State University is alive and well as well. We did beat Idaho 62-28. All right. But recently, today's CNBC article came out and stated that Idaho occupies 3 of the top 20 job markets in the United States. Number 2 is Idaho Falls. Number 13 is Boise. And number 15 is Pocatello. To me, that's pretty darn exciting to occupy 3 of the top 20. So in Rexburg, things are moving along well. Many of the, because of Brigham Young University, Idaho, they have multifamily housing is experiencing tremendous growth, as is the student housing. Idaho Falls is maintaining all of their growth. The Ball Ventures project that they've got is continuing to do Class A business space and residential. And in Pocatello and Chubbuck, home to Idaho State University, the FBI is in full swing. They have an addition of 160,000 square foot new cyber data facility. ITD awarded a new interchange to be constructed in Pocatello for the Northgate District, a new 4,500 acre project that is already taken off. The interchange will be completed this August 2019. I'll turn the time over to Mike for Canyon County's update.
Thanks, Don. Canyon County has stability in all market segments in 2018. It's being driven by the industrial sector. Strong industrial sales and leasing activity has lowered our vacancy rates from 2% to 0.53% this year. Additionally, we have approximately 2 million square feet of new industrial projects that have either been proposed or announced, with the vast majority of them being built around the Idaho Center in Napa and Sky Ranch in Caldwell. The gem of all this industrial development is a proposed 850,000 square foot Amazon distribution facility that will be located near the Idaho Center. The office market in Napa and Caldwell has been strong, with vacancy dropping to 5.8%. We still have not reached the rents quite yet for that new Class A development that's going to be needed, and most of the demand continues to be around the I-84 corridors. Downtown Napa and Caldwell continue to have good trajectory on redevelopment. Caldwell is leading the way with the new $7 million Indian Creek Plaza, which includes a new movie theater, office retail development, and a proposed boutique hotel in 2019. Additionally, in downtown Napa, Colliers recently brokered the sale of an entire half block for redevelopment, and the buyer has committed to spending over $2.7 million in refurbishment. The Napa-based College of Western Idaho continues to see record growth. We now have enrollment of over 33,000 students. It's the fastest growing community college in the nation, and it now has the highest enrollment of any secondary school in the state of Idaho. And finally, multifamily continues to impress. With all the new product that's coming online, our vacancy has still dropped from 4.4 to 1.8% in 2018. Next, we have Devin Ogden that will give an update on the industrial market.
Thanks, Mike. The headline for the industrial market this year is extreme low vacancy. As Mike alluded to, as far as Canyon County, overall value-wide, we're at less than 2% vacancy. This is an all-time low. What does it mean? Well, with the lack of inventory, coupled with the increased continual demand we have on industrial space, prices are increasing, the lease rates. They've gone from 49 cents a square foot monthly up to 59 cents. These are asking rates over a 4-year span. But in addition to that 26% rental increase, landlords are giving far less in tenant improvements and concessions, making that price gap quite larger. The growth, it will continue to be very strong. Both the local growth, grassroots growth, but also out-of-state companies continue to recognize the fact that they can no longer effectively service our market remotely. Now we're hitting all these dynamics bring us to a certain tipping point where actually spec development, which we haven't seen for almost a decade, can be profitable even with the higher construction cost. Now, on the map behind me is just some of the industrial development, both speculative development and owner-user development, either currently going on or will be occurring here shortly, going on throughout the valley. We're seeing owner-users going out there and actually looking at land, buying land to build their own buildings because they cannot find a facility that meets their requirements, and they cannot afford to wait for an opportunity to surface. And now I'll turn it over to John for the land.
So right now is a great time to be a developer in the Valley. When we talk about embracing growth, all of the cities that our developers are involved in doing projects in are encouraging growth in their cities, especially infill, like what we see going on in North Boise or out on Fairview Avenue, but also a lot of multi-use projects like Deer Flat Road in Kuna, or the master plan communities that we see out there in West Eagle. Industrial land, if we could ever find ourselves a piece of land that's got a rail siding, come see me, because we've got a good demand for industrial land for more development work, but especially a rail-served piece of industrial. Nampa, Caldwell, Meridian, and Boise are all seeing good industrial growth. We built over and sold over 4,000 new homes in the Treasure Valley in the last year, plus about another 1,000 multifamily units. So we really are embracing growth at all levels. And Melissa will tell you some more about the retail side.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. So in retail, we're seeing a really high increase in demand as well as growth in the retail sector in the Boise MSA. And the reason why is because retail normally follows residential growth as well as new employers entering into the market. So that demand is going up to be able to service the growth that we're seeing. And it's really interesting because it's bringing us to the point where we have an overall vacancy rate of about 5% in the Boise MSA, with some submarkets as low as 1%. So really, really fascinating to look at that. And as we look at that, what we need to evaluate is how we go about embracing the future and the growth in the Boise MSA. With the average asking rates for existing product, we're about $14 to $16 per square foot. And to get new developments to pencil, you need to be around the high 20s to low 30s per square foot. So that really brings us to evaluating, as we are in this entire conference, how do we go about evaluating new development? How do we go about really evaluating and embracing the growth of Idaho? Another thing I want to talk about is last year we were looking at these big box vacancies that were coming available, and we were really concerned and questioning on how those would be filled. And I think that this year we found our answer came a lot sooner than expected, and a lot of those big box vacancies have been filled with recreational concepts or experience-related concepts. And the reason why that's interesting is because it shows how retail will continue to adapt and evolve and thrive regardless to the internet. So that being said, I'll pass it off to Jamie Anderson for office.
Okay. Well, Clay said brokers are positive, so I need all of your help. Okay? Be nice to your new neighbors that came in from the West in hopes that they invite their friends that own tech companies to join us. That's our hope in office, so we need your help. Overall, office had a nice improvements over the year in Ada County with improvements in both vacancy rate and asking rate, although be it modest. Vacancy rate improved 8.7%, down almost 0.75%. Asking rates in Ada County increased by 35 cents a square foot. That was bolstered mostly by Class A space in the downtown core and Meridian markets. You saw Meridian with an increase of almost $4 a square foot, so nice improvement there. Recent improvements is also driving new office product. You'll see Pioneer Crossing or 10 Mile are evidence of developers feeling better about the market. Projects like Central Valley Plaza and 11th and Idaho that have been announced are probably more likely than ever in 2019. However, another thing that you're seeing is with construction costs at all-time highs, Class A office space would be delivered if it is to come in the $19 to $25 a square foot triple net range. So quite a significant improvement there. Similar to last year's, growth has come mostly from Idaho companies just expanding their footprint. Larger tenants out there are looking for newer spaces that provide open concepts or more efficient floor plans. When you get to look at Class B or C type product, actually the market for purchase was much more active there than it was for lease. Companies are looking to buy product under replacement costs and hopefully repurpose them. So outlook in 2019 is very positive, but we certainly hope that some of these California transplants invite some of their tech friends to join us here. So that's what's going on in office. Lou, if you could take us into investments.
Thanks, Jamie. So the office, or rather the investment market remains very strong, near last year's levels. On a national basis, transaction volume is down about 4% year to date, but sold prices are actually up 7% annually. And locally, both transaction volume and sold prices are up 3% year to date. Capital continues to flow from coastal markets into Idaho, most notably from California. Most of these transactions are driven by 1031 exchanges, and they're most commonly in the $1 to $4 million range. And to these investors coming from out of market, Idaho offers great value. We have lower rents, we have slightly higher cap rates, and this means that these investors are able to purchase at lower prices per square foot and closer to replacement cost. Also attracting these investors is the expectation that Idaho is going to see continued above average growth, which provides upside. This upside potential is also attracting more institutional investors to our market. We've seen increased activity from both REITs and private equity groups so far in 2018. Here are some of the transactions that Colliers Investment Group has brokered so far this year. So regarding the future, although interest rates are still low compared to long-term averages, they've risen significantly over the last year. The 10-year Treasury One Common Lending Index, as an example, is up about 100 basis points over the last year. And rising interest rates do put upward pressure on cap rates. One thing that should help and continue to help values in our market are rising rents. 2018 has brought declining vacancy in most product categories, and along with that, rent growth. So we expect that trend to continue, and we expect Idaho to remain attractive to investors. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Clay.
All right, so what we tried to do, and we've done in the last couple of years, is as you guys RSVP'd in, we tried to aggregate questions and try to answer questions as best we could based on your interest. So these panelists have been prepared somewhat with the questions that you had so that we could answer to them or address them appropriately. Kind of in categories. The first category is more to do with corporations and entities that are in Idaho or coming to Idaho. We wanted to address that as questions came in. Don, a question about the FBI. I don't know that people are aware of the FBI's presence in Pocatello. It's clearly growing. Maybe you can share some insights in there on that.
Be glad to, thank you. How many people in here know that there's an FBI facility in Pocatello? Quite a few, and there's also quite a few that don't. In 1998, the Department of Justice, because of the technology we had, decided that they needed to have another data facility to back up a data facility to back up another data facility. And so they moved it to Pocatello, one of the 15 or 20 that they had in existence. Well, with the advent of cybersecurity and all the issues that were been created with cyber hacking and all of that, they decided to get back together and decide, how are we going to fix this problem? So they consolidated 7 facilities in the United States and all over the world to 3 facilities in the world. One is in Alabama, the other one's in West Virginia, and the other one is in Pocatello. The great news about it is the unit chief in Pocatello now calls the FBI center there the FBI of the West. What that means to us in eastern Idaho and to everybody here in the state is that we've got state-of-the-art cyber facilities in our backyard, which nobody else has got. So that's a real plus. The other plus is that they've got 320 jobs out there right now for people to fill those jobs. One of the reasons why they chose Pocatello was because of one, Brigham Young University, Idaho, and Idaho State University. They can put them through their intern programs. And as juniors in college, they can get them through the intern program, and when they graduate as seniors, they could be full-fledged FBI agents. There's a lot of things that go on in the FBI facility there that I don't know about, that we all don't know about, but there are real spooks that are there. And there is some spy stuff going on, but we don't know about what's happening there. So consequently, that's one of the great things that's happening in Pocatello that's driving what we're seeing there. Right now, if you wanted to get a hotel room in Pocatello, you can't. So there's 4 new hotels planned for 2019. And that's because of companies like Avia and Nana that are both coming in. They're billion-dollar corporations that provide ancillary services to the FBI. The plans are, from what I'm understanding, is there'll be another 1,800 jobs created by those companies of people moving to Pocatello. Right now in Pocatello, we've got Pocatello and Chubbuck. Is anybody from Chubbuck? Don't get mad at me for not mentioning it. Okay. Pocatello, Chubbuck, we've only got about 100 homes on the entire market. We're 800 homes short just to meet the demands today. And the multi-level or the multi-family units, Class A, is non-existent. So there's plenty of opportunity for developers and things to happen in the market.
Thanks, Don. I'm moving around here, so.
Oh, okay.
Devin, Amazon is a big story and everything in the market and elsewhere. You've helped them in Idaho. Maybe you can shed some light on what their plans are, what they're doing here.
Well, back up more, bigger picture. I mean, they're growing so fast. They're just trying to catch up, right? They're keeping up with customer demand, trying to maintain and gain market share, and quite honestly, feels like they're trying to take over the world. But they, here locally, I mean, they're in a hyper-competitive business that's asset. They lack in assets. That industry lacks in real estate assets, and so right now they're looking to increase their real estate assets because they want to decrease the delivery time, quick delivery, and reduce transportation costs. And where the pinch point in their process, in a lot of the processes of these retailers, is the facilities that put them in the best, well-located facilities, effective facilities that can get the product to the consumer. And so you're seeing that, and that's why in 2019 you'll see Amazon will be the single biggest industrial real estate absorber at 40 million square feet in the 1 year. And that will help put them in that position. And they'll have, they're already, and it's, companies like Amazon, their transportation costs, 50% of the transportation cost is in that final mile. And they're already, we talked about the 850,000 square foot facility proposed in Nampa, but I already helped them secure some land. They're already putting up been doing a 17,000 square foot facility. We did this earlier this year, put up a 17,000 square foot facility to do the last mile delivery. And then on the 850,000 square foot proposed one, if you follow what they're doing nationally, they're rolling out a new state-of-the-art fulfillment centers, multi-level, highly automated, and they're all about 850,000. So it appears that that Nampa, the one that's going to be coming here, will be one of those.
All right,
I'm personally excited about that because our Napa Colliers office is right across the street, so I'm looking forward to that same-day delivery.
Drone.
With the drone.
It might be a part-time job for you. You can go pick up your product. All right, Jamie, as you think about the West Coast migration, we talk about that, and hoping that they bring their friends. Are we seeing any West Coast tenants coming in? What's the story there?
Well, I mean, that's what everybody wants and everybody's really waiting for. Fortunately, in talking to Boise Valley Economic Partnership, they say that tours from companies from outside the market are up threefold this year compared to last. So that's a very positive thing. But as these companies come, they're giving us some feedback. And part of that feedback is that we don't have enough larger existing office vacancies available now. If they were to come, we don't have any 25,000 square foot floor plates, things like that. That's one thing. The other thing that they tell us is that they're still a little concerned that the workforce would support a new operation here or a secondary operation here. So they want to come to market and they kind of want to try us out the way Paylocity did. Okay, and this creates a challenge for office developers because you would be asked as a developer, hey, we want an initial landing spot. If things go, we're going to go quick, and we need, a secondary 25,000 square foot spot possibly in the same submarket. Does that really exist today? No, not really, or not many places. So, we'll kind of see the opportunity for these tenants increase over time, but that's just going to be as office developers, build more space, get a little bit more speculative. That's really going to fix that.
So if you build it, they will come, but it's on somebody else's
You
dime.
know, and certainly we understand why everybody's a little cautious about that. But when it does come to those bigger tenants, you know, the Googles or all that as a secondary, we're just not quite there yet with our space. But we are. Great things are going on development-wise.
Okay, good. We're going to jump to a different topic, just broad stroke, national economy, investment market, several questions on this. Lou, how is this economic cycle different than the last one? What's different about this round?
Yeah, for one thing, locally, if you were to look at our vacancy rates in 2007, middle of 2007, which would have been the peak of the last market, you'd notice that vacancy rates were a lot higher then versus now, and you can see that here on this graph. And so that's one big difference for us locally then versus now. There's another set of graphs that'll come up here in a second that will show our rental rate growth over the same time period, so looking back to like 2007, 2008, peak of the last cycle, as compared to growth in construction costs. And you can see, you know, we've had some recent rent growth, and we've all talked about that on this panel, but it's not even come close to keeping up with construction costs in most categories. There are some exceptions to that, like multifamily, where there's more building, but there's definitely a gap between rent growth and construction cost growth. So to me, what those two things mean are that if we were to head into a recession tomorrow, we wouldn't see anywhere near the oversupply issues that we saw in the last downturn, and we should not experience the same types of declines in rents, generally speaking.
Okay.
In the development business, we don't have a backlog of houses. We don't have a backlog of lots. So, you know, there's really nothing that's going to, there's no factors sitting out there that's going to drive pricing downward should the economy not agree with us in the short term.
I think that's something we hear consistently on the residential side, that the inventory in the last round was much more significant than now. It's
And the same goes for office or retail.
I
much
think we're a little
tighter.
bit more of a diverse market than we were, say, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
As far as the industries that we have here, I think we've diversified, and so it limits our risk a little bit more.
Good. One other question relating to trends, cap rates. Can cap rates go any lower?
Yeah, so if you were, here's a graph that shows cap rates over the last 17 years, and you can see we're right now, we're at a low point. These are national numbers, but Idaho would look much the same. If you were to, even if you were to look back further in time, that observation would still hold. We are at a low point in terms of cap rates. And as we mentioned earlier, interest rates are rising, and rising interest rates will tend to put upward pressure on cap rates. So given those two things, it's hard to see a path where cap rates decline much further. I mean, you could have, you know, some modest reduction in cap rates if the market continues to strengthen, but it would be it'd be hard to see the cap rates go down much. That being said, that doesn't necessarily mean that as interest rates rise, cap rates are going to spike. So this next slide shows on the bottom in gray, you can see the 10-year Treasury over time. And then on the top line in blue, you can see cap rates over the same period of time. So the difference between the bottom line and the top line, that represents debt and equity spreads over time. And those fluctuate. So if you were to look at the last 12 months, you can see that the spread has narrowed. So what that means is that interest rates have gone up, but cap rates have actually been flat to maybe slightly declining over that same period. So, you know, in looking at that spread, even though it's narrowed over the last year, it's still significantly wider than it was, say, between 2005 and 2008. So what that tells me is that even though cap rates are unlikely to decline significantly, assuming interest rates keep rising, we still potentially do have some room for interest rates to rise without cap rates necessarily needing to follow in lockstep.
Yeah, that's one for the eyes there if you can't see it. But it's an important point. They're correlated, but not highly correlated. It depends on the spread or the risk that people are willing to take. So thank you. We're going to jump into retail. Melissa, we hear a lot about Amazon and internet killing retail. Is the internet killing retail?
You know, I think this is very important that we need to really address this conversation. It's been on our minds for a long time. So just by a show of hands, how many of you guys have ordered something from Amazon or online in the past week? Awesome. So the reason why I ask you that is if you look at it, it seems like right now where we're at in the market, right now where we're at with the transition of internet, that the internet's going to kill retail. But statistically, if you look at it, in 2008, 4% of purchases were made online, dollar-wise. That has only increased to a little bit over 8% in the past 10 years. So that really goes to show you the fact that the internet's not going to kill retail, that retail's still thriving and doing well. Another thing that I think we really need to evaluate with this is we're all concerned on the retail segment of the Amazon effect. Well, Amazon purchased Whole Foods, brick and mortar, right? So if Amazon is entering into the brick and mortar thing, not just with Whole Foods, but with their bookstore, that concept that they have, it goes to show that the company that we're scared of killing retail is investing into retail. So I don't think so. I think that retail is alive and well.
It's interesting because it sure feels like we spend more than 8% of our dollars on the internet.
I agree.
I guess it depends on how you define purchasing a car or groceries, but on a dollar basis, that probably is true. It's 8%. One other question in that category, how are retailers adapting to this phenomenon?
Yeah, I think it's going both ways. So in the first speaker we had here talked about clothing lines basically having subscription services. The one he referred to is Rent the Runway. Rent the Runway is a huge online retailer that provides really high-end clothing, primarily female generated, that you can have delivered, but they're actually converting to brick and mortar stores as well. So the conversion's going both ways. In regards to local retailers, I do a lot of local tenant rep. A lot of local retailers have vocalized the fact that the internet has helped them with equaling a level playing field with a lot of these big national concepts because they have easy access to marketing to their demographics. So it's actually, in a sense, strengthened the retail corridor. And then the last point, Clay, that I'll make on this is you see national big box retailers adapting with the internet. You have Albertsons offering same-day delivery to be able to cater and use the internet to increase their sales, as well as with Grubhub, as well as Uber Eats. Fast food restaurants, full service restaurants are using the internet to increase their accessibility to their customers.
All right, thank you. My wife likes to show Parks and Rec, and I think the guy there created a company called Rent-A-Swag.
There you
So
go.
I think that concept of renting clothing was stolen from that TV show. But.
I love that show.
All right, we're going to jump to the topic of local development. A lot of questions there. Mike, question for you. While the commercial real estate market is strong, what are some concerns on the horizon?
Well, I've broken it down to three basic segments. I got my immediate concerns, some mid-level concerns, and long-term concerns. For the immediate concerns, the overall lack of inventory, high construction rates are driving the price per square foot and also driving up rental rates. You know, our tenants and owners are going to have to adjust their business models to work through those additional costs. Additionally, lack of inventory is having some loss on business. I had a national industrial company that wanted to be in the Treasure Valley. We looked for quite a few months for a 30,000 square foot building that had some specialty requirements, and we just could not find it. They cannot wait the year and a half for it to be built, so they ended up going to another market. We're talking about new construction rates. I also have a distribution client that's growing. We're looking at needing to add another 100,000 square feet facility. Last week I got a quote in for a build-a-suit, and the rent was 70 cents triple net. It's a very difficult number for them to swallow. So, you know, our owner users have to, and tenants are going to have to make sure their business plans can accommodate these new costs. The other thing that we don't talk about is our triple net fees. So a lot of tenants are seeing their triple net fees raise 30 to 50% over the last couple of years, and most of that's being driven by the additional value of the real estate in the form of taxes, and that does have a significant impact on tenants. And it can affect landowners too, because when you know a tenant's looking at their overall costs, the triple net fees impact that and can drive down the actual triple net rent that's going to the owner. The midterm concerns that I have is something that Lou talked about, and that's interest rates. So, the higher interest rates are going to cause higher holding costs for building owners, and I think it's yet to be seen how it's going to impact leverage return for capitalization rate buyers. I have some buyers out right now that are looking at shopping centers, and because of the concerns of that 10-year Treasury note, they're definitely waiting for higher cap rates because they have that leverage return that they have to get to move forward. Long term, my concern is with all the growth that we're having in the valley, is we really have to, as a community, we really have to be dedicated to education. With all this growth, we're going to have a lot of kids coming. We've got to be committed to that K through 12 investment, but also supporting Boise State and CWI. We talk to our employers, and across the board, one of the number one things they talk about is workforce training. College of Western Idaho, I alluded to earlier, we're up to 33,000 students. If you look at a typical MSA and how a community college integrates into that, it's not unreasonable to think that CWI could be approaching that 50,000 student range if we provide that facilities for them to grow.
That's something kind of beating a dead horse a little bit, but finding employment, that's the first thing. Probably when a new company comes in, they're saying, "Hey, find me a building," and then it's, where am I going to get my employees? If you present them a building, it's like, all right, that's great, but where am I going to get my employees? But the good thing is we have low vacancy or low employment here, but you compete with other areas. Everyone is in the same boat.
And it affects everybody. We were looking at a ag user in Wilder, and the first question they asked was, "Where's the employees?" And I mean, even out in Western Canyon County, you think it's hard to find somebody to man a desk or do whatever here in Boise. Try finding somebody to drive a heister in Wilder. It's a low-skilled job, but just impossible to find.
And not all of these demands require a college degree. That's one thing that the College of Western Idaho has done really well. I mean, there's a lot of technical demands out there, whether it's a welder, a plumber, jobs that you don't think about that you can get a 2-year certificate there, and they're needed. And like a diesel mechanic and a welder, virtually the day they graduate, there's job offers for $45,000 a year. That's a nice wage in Idaho when you're 20 years old.
Mike, you had mentioned something about getting priced out for a client. And Devin, let's go back to you had a graph that showed that industrial rates at least flattened for a 2-year period. Is that people walking away from deals? Are we going to push through that rate? What are your thoughts on that?
Quite honestly, when I first saw the kind of the stat, I'm like, well, it kind of surprised me that it started leveling off. Reasons for that could be the fact that we're finally getting new product coming on the market. So there's a little bit more opportunities for tenants. I have heard also it could be some pushback from tenants to a certain level. I know I've had several national tenant clients of mine that as we work through a deal, they lament, we ended up doing the deal, but they lamented saying, "Hey, Devin, we're spending more money in Boise, Idaho than we are in most any of the other markets we're in," and they're in, throughout the whole United States in a lot of primary markets. So I don't know if that's the case, but Mike talked about it earlier, is I think we might be maybe still a plateau, but I think prices are still probably going to be going up because if the demand's not going away and the construction prices aren't going to do a drastic turn to the south, and the developers they have to make a profit. It's got to be profitable if they're not going to do the deal. So maybe we're leveling off somewhat, but it seems like we might be a little bit of a plateau and might be trending upward again.
Pushing through. Okay, good. Well, let's jump to Jamie. We have the Silicon Valley, we have Silicon Slopes in southern Salt Lake or Draper area. Can Boise be Silicon Valley East?
Well, I have a feeling we're going to talk a lot about what we were just talking about labor force wise. But first, BSU, Computer Sciences, College of Innovation and Design are doing great things. The answer, can we be the next Silicon Slopes? I think we're a ways out. First you look at capital markets there. Boise is just such a smaller market. Then you get into, the labor force, and that's your biggest issue by far. If you look at the Silicon Slopes, there are 6 or 7 universities there. If you go to something like the Bay Area, there's even more. So It's just hard for an MSA our size to compete when we're talking college graduates, software engineers and things like that. So that's probably one of the biggest things. So are we going to be big tech? No, but I think one thing that you need to look at is, we do have an opportunity to be the startup of newer immersive technologies like virtual reality. I just helped a client who that was kind of their niche. I also, if you look at smartphone apps, those sound kind of silly, right? That's a $950 billion a year industry. And I read an article that Boise is poised to lead that job growth over the next 5 years, and a lot of it is driven by ag. Agricultural companies like Simplot are finding new ways to track their data and get out to their crops. And so we have some of those opportunities to really land some technology that, again, maybe it's not a Google or an Adobe, but it is technology that hasn't landed anywhere yet. Okay. So I think that's our opportunity.
Thank you. Don, we'll jump back over here, bring Pocatello back into the discussion.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We won't go to Idaho State, we'll talk about Pocatello. There's a new interchange that's coming online. It's supposed to be ready in late 19. Maybe share just a little bit how that came about or what impact that'll have.
Over the last 3 years, the property owner that's just north of Chubbuck Road in Pocatello, it's depicted there on the screen there, is right there is 268 acres of a multi-unit facility there for multi-use. Right across the street is the Bannock County Event Center. It's 80 acres with a walking track. And the plan here is to live, work, and play. And I heard that somewhere in one of these talks earlier. And that's exactly what the plan is here, is to look for those urban people, office complexes, and consequently between the city of Chubbuck, Pocatello, Bannock County, and the ITD and the state of Idaho, along with the developer, they did a public-private partnership and paid for, all the money's in the bank, to put the interchange in. And that'll service that 4,500 acre development that's going on and the northern part of Chubbuck and Pocatello. It'll also be the access point for the new temple that's being built by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints up there. And everybody knows what happens when a temple goes in a certain area. Look what happened in Meridian and Twin Falls. The same kind of thing is going to happen in that area. And consequently, because of what the FBI is doing, I mentioned this earlier, our local builders only have the capacity to build 200 homes a year. And we're 800 homes short right now, even with the 200 that they're building. So consequently, there's a need for those kinds of things to happen in that Pocatello market. Interestingly enough, Pocatello's cost of living, and Chubbuck, cost of living at 87% of the national average, which is even less than the Boise Valley. Wow. So, which is a good thing, but it's getting those jobs and bringing those kinds of companies over to that region and competing with the FBI for those same kinds of jobs, and Nania and the others that are bringing 1,800 jobs in. So we're all in a great position, no matter what part of the state we live in. We just all need to capitalize on it together and work together to make it even better for people to capitalize and live in a great state of Idaho.
All right, I like it. I think as we all drive through Pocatello now, we'll all look at it differently. We'll appreciate some of the attributes, and we'll perhaps look you up and go for a tour.
Okay.
We realize time is short. We're over time a bit. So really quickly, just a couple questions. John, housing costs, any comments on that? Development in South Boise, just things that are going on?
Yeah, so the housing cost thing is, it's a little bit of a red herring. Everybody on this panel and everybody who's looking at building new office space or new industrial space all talk about the increases in costs and how tough it is to do new things as these costs increase. But what they've done in the housing business is they've simply raised the prices. and while people complain a little bit about the raised prices, what happens is demand fills the housing. Even with the 30% increase in housing prices or the 80% increase in housing prices we've seen in the last 10 years, or the 20 to 30% we've seen in the last couple of years, we still are not putting enough housing on the ground to meet demand. It's the reason the prices are up so high. And I would just put it to all of you and all the specialists, all the specialties, to embrace the growth, ask the higher price, get the people into the area, because our cities are all embracing growth. 2,000 new homes are coming in South Boise at Syringa Valley. If you haven't been down to Lake Hazel and Cole and driven the new piece of asphalt to know where you should do that, it's kind of fun. Watch out, it's got a hairpin curve in it. And while we see a lot of industrial growth going on in Nampa and Caldwell and Meridian, the amount of industrial growth that's just going on down in Gowan Road is almost as much as the rest of it combined. So, you know.
Well, the growth is limited to where you can get land.
Right.
Right? And if it's residential, it's like where are the buildable lots? And a lot of them are controlled by certain developers. And and you look at land, you talk about industrial by the airport, it's like you might drive by the airport, man, look at all this land, there's all kinds of land to grow on. No, you can't build on that because it's the airport land.
City of Boise owns it, and it's part of the airport.
Yeah, it's certain spots you can do, and that's why all the development's going farther south out. Even though I saw last night that 75,000 or 77,000 square foot trucking facility was denied last night, but it'll probably be appealed. But a lot of growth going on. That's where the land is. People go where the land is. And that's where Canyon County is. A lot of land out there.
Well, let's finish up there. Last question, Mike. We've talked on the front end a little bit about multifamily. You shared a little bit about Canyon County. Maybe just some closing statements on that side of the market as it relates to the Treasure Valley multifamily.
Well, I have to admit, when I was compiling some of this data to talk about this conference, I was even surprised on how good the multifamily numbers are. So then of Q4 last year, we had 3% vacancy in Ada County in multifamily and 4.4% in Canyon County. At the end of Q2, which is of this year, which is the latest data that we have, we're at 1.8% vacancy, even with all this new production that's coming online. We're not keeping up with the growth. Additionally, what's fascinating is the average rental rate in Canyon County. So our rental rates in Canyon County are lower than Ada County, but the average rental rate in Canyon County went up $49 per month for the average apartment versus $34 a month in Ada County. So we're seeing a lot of demand, I think, because of that lower price point being driven out to Canyon County. When we look at the new jobs that we talked about with the new companies potentially coming in with Amazon, NX Edge, Autovol, in the Napa market, that's 2,000 to 3,000 new jobs there that's going to continue to put that pressure on single and multifamily demand. When we're talking about how developers typically look at multifamily, once we hit 5% is when most developers start to pull the brakes in on the new development. And once we hit about 7% is when you start seeing concessions going more towards the tenants. So we've still got some room left in that.
All right, thank you. Well, we obviously can't cover all the questions asked and not the level of detail that maybe some like, but maybe too much detail for others. So we appreciate your patience. I think hopefully this spurred some thoughts or questions that you might have as follow-up to our panelists or any of us. As you know, we have email, we have phones. I think one of the greatest values that brokers have is information. We talk to a lot of people. We're constantly getting a vibe for where people are at, what they're thinking, what they're doing. So happy to be that resource. With that, we'll turn the time back over to Jim to wrap things up.
All right, thank you. Thank you to our panel of experts. Really great information. Appreciate all of you. I know that I am the last thing that stands between you and a lot of alcohol and food outside, so bear with me for 1 minute, just a couple of acknowledgments. I'd like to thank, again, our sponsors, our presenting sponsors, Washington Trust, A10 Capital, and Givens Personally. Thank you very much. Our co-sponsors, Echo Engineering, Centimark Roofing and Flooring, Cutting Edge Landscape, Infinity Signs, and Group 1 Sotheby's. We really appreciate the efforts of all and the generosity of our sponsors in helping us make this happen. Please, if you haven't had the opportunity on your way out, there are tables out here that the sponsors have. Please stop, talk with them. They've got some freebies and giveaways and information on their businesses. We hope that you'll work with them. Another acknowledgement, we couldn't put this on, particularly with a group of extremely ADD-driven brokers, without a tremendous marketing and research group. And I'd just like for that group to stand up, please, so you can be acknowledged. Nick Fry, the head of our research department, Paige Crane in research, Caitlin, where did Caitlin wander off to? She's over there with all the marketing support. And honestly, two people in particular, I'm going to give her a moment to work her way up here slowly. But first of all, Sarah Smart, who does all the graphics, all of the technology. We couldn't make this happen without her. And finally, as you can tell, Melanie Nielsen has had some other things to think about. And Melanie will be take a big, deep sigh of relief now that this is over. You can go enjoy a drink or perhaps not. I want to special thanks to Melanie for putting this on. We couldn't do it without her, and you've done a tremendous job. Thank you, Melanie. And finally, I just want to acknowledge and thank all of you. You all are the leaders. You are all the thinkers and the folks that are going to, hopefully, in partnership with Colliers, embrace these opportunities, embrace this growth, embrace the future of what we've got going on here in the Treasure Valley and throughout Idaho. We look forward to working with all of you, and certainly we hope to see you all here a year from now at Colliers Outlook 2019. Now, if you want to exit through the doors and head to the right, we've got our reception following the conference here. Thank you very much.